horrific. All right, our first reading is Can the Working Class Unite by author Jen Roche. And the alienation and division within the working class takes many forms. The backwards notion pushed and upheld by the ruling capitalist class that any and all members of blue-collar labor are prejudiced against one another not only does a disservice to the wide range of diversity the working class holds, it also further alienates us from one another by scapegoating one group as more predisposed to holding bias than another, therefore causing further division. By pitting one group of workers against another based on race or gender identity, despite the fact that we are all oppressed under capitalism, works well to keep us distracted with hating one another instead of turning this into a revolution against the capitalist class. However, an example to counteract this notion is the recent union activity at Starbucks, both here in Colorado and elsewhere in places like New York, show how when people gain class consciousness, they can begin to collectivize despite the odds, with things like Starbucks closing stores and unfairly penalizing union members. And there is support from people who are neither Starbucks baristas nor restaurant workers, showing that we can all unite against capitalism. The working class is the one class in society with material interest in challenging all forms of oppression, as Marx said, is a class with radical chains, and that by liberating itself, all of humanity may become liberated as well. The beating heart of the beast that is capitalism is kept alive and pumping by the exploited labor of the working class. Marxism can be used to unite the working class against their own subjugation under capitalist rule. His teachings and ideas can serve as a way for us to not only put an end to suffering under capitalism, but to end capitalism altogether. Lenin referred to a revolution as the festival of the oppressed, and when people begin peeling back the rind on the rotten fruit of the capitalistic system, they can come to realize that the state does not help them. Their bosses have no real interest in them except for exploitative purposes, and that we as the workers have more in common with one another than we will ever have in common with the bourgeoisie ruling class. The ruling class can get divided under capitalism. Several things stand in the way of members of the working class recognizing their common interests and uniting. It is in the interest of capitalism to keep us all divided through artificial means, whether that be through gender, race, nationality, or other vehicles for the capitalist system to justify further exploitation of already vulnerable people. These segregations have not always been in our society and our culture, and are a sharp tool in the trade kit of capitalism used to suppress us further and keep us from collectivizing. It is essential to capitalism to keep this tool sharpened regularly, as the more divided the working class is, the harder it is for us to unite against our oppressors. If we were to see that we are all in the same struggle together, and that struggle unfortunately disproportionately affects some more than others, we'd be better fit to overthrow the ruling class. A revolution is the only way to have this. It should come as no surprise that systems of oppression, such as transphobia, homophobia, white supremacist ideals, and patriarchal ideals, keep us oppressed. The further we are alienated from one another, the further we are oppressed. And it is in the interest of capitalism to suppress anything that doesn't help keep the ruling classes' already overstuffed pockets full. Now, here's a quote from Marx that can help illustrate this point. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the exportation, enslavement, and entombment in the minds of the indigenous population of that continent, the beginnings of the conquest and plunder of India, and the conversion of Africa to a preserve for the commercial hunting of blackskins are all things that characterize the dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief movements of primitive accumulation. The fact that the veiled slavery of the wage laborers in Europe needed the unqualified slavery of the New World as its pedestal. Capital comes dripping from head to toe from every pore with blood and dirt. Some lessons that can be drawn from the civil rights and the feminist movements of the past are ones involving the movements uprooting the capitalistic structure. In the 70s, as more women entered the workforce and gained access to birth control, they were also to have a more public life, and this helped to provide a basis for women's liberation. With the civil rights movement, the struggles of slaves and abolitionists paved the way. Both of these show how truly oppressive capitalism is by forcing women to do both domestic work and caregiver roles in the home, and perform all the duties that a job has in the workforce, often simultaneously, and shows how this country was founded on the exploited labor of slavery in order to keep it running. And there are still many ways slavery echoes through the halls of this country, with many of the tools capitalism uses to keep us divided still disproportionately affecting Black communities. The author's critique of privilege theory is that it is a tool used to keep us divided, and keep that division running deep. It, conveniently for capitalism and the ruling class, keeps us baring our teeth at the people we have more things in common with than the ruling class could ever wish. If we are all set on oppressing one another instead of dismantling unjust hierarchies and unifying the ruling class, may continue to oppress us all. Some members of the working class may accept reactionary ideas because it allows them to feel as if someone else is below them, making sure they're too busy oppressing their fellow members of the working class instead of turning this desperation of their situation that capitalism has constructed is key for them to continue to rule. This dynamic can become overcome through struggle, which demonstrates that class struggle is irreconcilable with reactionary modalities of thinking. Class struggle is a conflict between the proles and the ruling class. Participating in this struggle leads to a greater consciousness by the working class by allowing us to see that there is no real material grounds for transphobic, homophobic, or racist schools of thought. It also helps us to see that our oppressor is not our fellow proles, but is instead the ruling class. It is the ruling class's best interest to keep the embers of the fires of racist, transphobic, and sexist ideals glowing hot. It tries to warm us with the notion that the powerlessness we feel is not caused by the ruling class, but instead by our fellow workers. With class struggle, we may snuff out the fires of the ruling class and see that it was made to divide us further and further in order to keep us from the revolution against it. Revolutionary organizing is of the utmost importance for class struggle. It is of the utmost importance for us to engage not just in organizing, but revolutionary thinking. It is with a revolution that we can overcome capitalism. It is with a revolution that we will be able to snuff out the fires of prejudice and division the ruling class is so keen on burning hot. It is with a revolution that we will have unity and solidarity for all the working class. And the other reading, Lessons for the New Black Freedom Struggle by Brian Bean. The current struggles against the institutional racism baked into the roots of this country and police brutality can only be won with a political awakening. People being pushed to the breaking point due to living in a country that was founded on nothing but oppression and genocide is not only expected, but should be celebrated as they fight to end oppression. Capitalism and racism are so deeply intertwined with one another that it would be as fruitful of an activity to try and take a cup of sugar out of a loaf of bread as it would be to try and have capitalism that isn't racist. The exploitation of the most vulnerable members of society who are already prosecuted at higher rates than their white or otherwise privileged peers who are already more likely to face the worst aspects of living in capitalist society will be exploited further. I have a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that was also used in the article that I thought kind of further illustrated this point. It says, "It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws. Racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. It is exposing the evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systemic rather than superficial flaws and suggests that radical reconstitution of society itself is a real issue to be faced." Taylor's critique of the Black political establishment is that the Black political establishment has led to a Black mayor of a Black town still calling upon the military to put a stop to a Black revolution. The Black freedom struggle faces many challenges, including nowadays a smaller leftist base and mass repressions, as well as the relentless oppression still faced under capitalism. Some notable examples of Black anti-capitalist thinkers include the Black Panther Party or Malcolm X. Some people may continue to insist that Marxism and the left are white and class reductionists because they're unfamiliar with the history of many groups like the aforementioned Black Panthers or the Combahee River Collective, often supporting socialist ideals. Any and all struggles against racism must also be struggles against capitalism because the two of them are so deeply intertwined. Revolutionary socialism is the only way to achieve this. Our interests are entwined because with the Black working class, because only with a collective struggle, only with class consciousness, and only with revolutionary socialism may we have unity and solidarity for all the working class.